Super Silver Haze won the Cannabis Cup 3 years in a row, and in the world of weed competitions, winning even once can make a strain famous forever. But back in the late 1990s, Super Silver Haze did something almost nobody has ever matched. It took first place at the High Times Cannabis Cup 3 years in a row. That kind of dominance turned it into an absolute legend, the gold standard that every energetic sativa is still measured against today. But the real story behind Super Silver Haze is even better than the trophies, because this strain solved a problem that had stumped growers for decades, and it's tangled up in one of the biggest credit disputes in cannabis history. This is the story of Super Silver Haze. So let's start with those famous cup wins, because I want to be honest with you about them, the way we always are. Super Silver Haze took home a first-place High Times Cannabis Cup award 3 straight years, in 1997, 98, and 99. That much is true. But there's a small detail worth knowing. Because in that first year, 1997, it actually won first place in a specific category, the hydro category, while the overall top prize that year went to a different coffee shop's entry. It was in the following 2 years, 98 and 99, that Super Silver Haze won the whole thing, the overall Cannabis Cup, back-to-back. So the 3 in a row is real, but that first win was a category crown, not the overall. Just had to clarify that for y'all before we get into this. No matter what way you put it, dominating that competition for 3 straight years in that era was an incredible achievement. Because back then, the Cannabis Cup was the toughest contest in the world, with every top seed bank throwing their best genetics at it. To keep winning against that kind of competition, so them going year after year, was almost unheard of. Now, to understand why this strain was such a huge deal, you have to understand the problem it fixed. And that problem was a legendary strain called Haze. Because original Haze, which came out of California decades earlier, produced one of the most amazing highs in all of cannabis. It was soaring, energetic, almost psychedelic, the kind of clear, buzzing, creative head high that sativa lovers dream about. There was just one issue though, and that was this. It was a complete nightmare to actually grow. See, Haze had what you'd call an impractical personality. The plants grew tall and lanky, they needed a ton of heat and space, and worst of all, they took forever to finish. Sometimes 14 to 16 weeks, or even longer, just to flower. On top of that, the yields were small and wispy. So while Haze produced this incredible high, it was so difficult and unprofitable to grow that it was basically dying out as a commercial strain. A grower could tie up their whole space for 4 months and still come away with a tiny harvest. Growers loved smoking it, but they hated farming it. For a commercial seed bank trying to make a living, that was a serious problem. So the challenge was obvious. Could someone capture that magical soaring Haze high, but in a plant that was actually realistic to grow? And that is exactly what Super Silver Haze pulled off. The breeders took that difficult Haze and crossed it with 2 of the toughest, most reliable strains around, Skunk and Northern Lights. And that combination turned out to be the magic formula. Skunk number 1 was one of the most dependable, resin-heavy strains ever made. Originally brought to the Netherlands by a breeder known as Sam the Skunkman, whose genetics quietly shaped a huge portion of the Amsterdam seed bank scene. And Northern Lights number 5, the specific phenotype used in these crosses, was a legendary indica famous for finishing fast and growing sturdy. Together, they were the perfect partners to tame that wild Haze, because those 2 strains brought everything Haze was missing. I mean, the Skunk and the Northern Lights number 5. Genetics added resin, they added serious yield, and most importantly, they slashed that ridiculous flowering time down to a much more manageable 9 to 11 weeks. But the impressive part is what didn't change. Even with all those upgrades, the finished strain still kept that beautiful, energetic, soaring haze high at its core. They'd basically created a commercially viable haze, all the magic with none of the headaches. Suddenly, a strain that had been fading away because it was too hard to grow was reborn as something a farmer could actually harvest and sell. It was the best of both worlds. And that new strain wasn't just easier to grow, it was gorgeous. Super Silver Haze grows these frosty buds absolutely coated in glittering, silvery white crystals. And that shimmering silver look is exactly where the silver in the name comes from. The terpene profile is a big part of what makes it so distinctive, with limonene driving that sharp citrus brightness, pinene adding a crisp, almost piney edge, and myrcene lending a little depth and weight underneath it all. The flavor is a sharp, memorable mix of spicy, skunky, and sour citrus, with a lemony bite on the exhale that you don't forget. And for its time, it was seriously potent, testing right up there with the strongest weed of that whole era. When you smelled it, you knew immediately you were dealing with something special. Now, the high is really the star of the show, and it's a classic daytime sativa experience. Super Silver Haze hits fast, delivering a rush of energy, euphoria, and creativity that people love for getting things done, being social, or just feeling uplifted. But because it's got that skunk and Northern Lights backbone, it also carries a little more physical weight than a pure haze, so it doesn't leave you feeling scattered. It's that perfect sweet spot of buzzing mental energy grounded by a smooth body feel. For a lot of people, that balance is exactly what made it their go-to daytime smoke. So this all brings us to the big question, the one that's caused decades of arguments. Who actually created Super Silver Haze? Because this is where the story gets genuinely messy, and I've got to lay out both sides fairly. The strain is famously associated with a powerhouse Amsterdam company called Greenhouse Seeds, run by a man named Arjan, who's known for winning piles of cannabis cups and calling himself the King of Cannabis. His company's name is stamped on all those famous Super Silver Haze victories, but the actual hands-on breeding work is widely credited to two other people. One was a brilliant breeder who went by the name Shanti Baba, who was a partner at Greenhouse in the 1990s. The other was Neville, an absolute legend in the cannabis world, the man who founded the Seed Bank of Holland, the very first cannabis seed bank ever to operate commercially, and the man who preserved much of the original haze genetics in the first place. But sadly, all good things must eventually come to an end, and the whole partnership fell apart. Around 1998, Shanti Baba split from Greenhouse and Arjan, and he took his plants with him, going on to co-found a new company called Mr. Nice Seed Bank. And ever since that split, the credit for Super Silver Haze has been fiercely disputed. On one side, Shanti Baba and his camp argue that he and Neville were the true breeding geniuses who actually created the strain, and that they hold the real original genetics. On the other side, Arjan and Greenhouse point out that Super Silver Haze won all those cannabis cups under the Greenhouse name, and Arjan says he worked directly with Neville during those years. So who's right? Well, the fairest way to put it is this. The brilliant breeding work is most often credited to Shanti Baba and Neville, while the marketing muscle, the brand, and the famous competition wins belonged to Greenhouse. Both companies still sell their own version to this day, each claiming theirs is the true original. And honestly, that argument is a big part of what keeps the legend of this strain alive. Now, to really get why this strain mattered so much, you have to picture the world it was born into. This was the golden age of the Amsterdam cannabis scene in the 1990s. The city's coffee shops were the center of the weed universe, and seed banks were locked in a fierce race to breed the next great strain. Every year they were pushing genetics further, hunting for that perfect combination of flavor, potency, and yield. And the Cannabis Cup was the ultimate battleground where they proved themselves. Winning it meant the whole world would come to Amsterdam just to try your weed, and it could turn an unknown strain into an overnight sensation. In that hyper-competitive environment, a single great strain could put a whole company on the map. And Greenhouse became a dominant force in exactly this way, and Super Silver Haze was one of the biggest reasons why. And the legacy of this strain is massive too, because Super Silver Haze didn't just win a few trophies and fade away. It became a permanent benchmark, the strain that defined what a top-tier, energetic sativa should be. Decades later, it's still a beloved staple on coffee shop menus around the world, and it's often held up as the strain that showed breeders how to make a difficult, exotic sativa actually practical. Its genetics even made their way into the Dutch medical cannabis program, with Bedroken, the Netherlands' licensed medical cannabis producer, that is incorporating Super Silver Haze into its pharmaceutical-grade lineup, which really tells you something about how seriously the broader industry came to respect this plant. And it went on to become a proud parent itself, most famously to Super Lemon Haze, which is another Cannabis Cup champion that took Super Silver Haze and crossed it with a lemony strain to create yet another legend. So its genetics didn't just win trophies, they got passed down and kept on winning. So at the end of the day, Super Silver Haze is one of the true greats, a strain that earned every bit of its legendary reputation. It solved the impossible puzzle of the haze plant, taming that wild, magical high into something growers could actually work with. It dominated the biggest competition in weed for 3 straight years, and it left behind both an incredible family of descendants and a credit dispute that people still argue about today. It's proof that behind every legendary strain, there's usually a story of brilliant breeding, fierce rivalry, and a little bit of magic.